have pretty strict rules around like what we bring home from work, just because, it can affect your home life or work life or whatever it is. And here we are coworkers, at home we are spouses. But it is interesting because since we started this leadership training, we have been talking about work more, just because we're talking about what we're learning in the leadership training and how it translates to things that happen in our personal lives out as well. So
yeah, we try not to bring work home. There are going to be the days, where you need to get something off your chest, or you just want to discuss something
or get an opinion.
Yeah, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
And there sometimes comes a point where the other person looks at you and is like, what, I think we've had enough for today. And that's the line, if usually we don't bring it home, but if we do and we're having a discussion and it gets too heavy per se, we know it's not the right time.
Yeah, because all couples, they go home and talk to their spouse about work, as like, at least that's what I think happens. But for us, like, it was pretty natural to draw that line. It never became like a conversation we had to have of like, we can only talk about work in the first 16 minutes that we're home. No, like if there's something that comes up and we want to discuss it, or he might wake up in the morning, it's like, I finally figured out what was going wrong with my programming yesterday. And I was like, oh, like, great, let's celebrate that success, but we're not going to sit there and talk about work the whole evening. It's not healthy. We have other things to do. And that to me is work-life balance, right? It's especially when you're working with your spouse, you really have to achieve a good level and a good balance, or it's just not going to work. And we will say working with your spouse is not for everyone.
No.
Yeah. No.
Well, I don't have the spouse experience, but I definitely have the father-son experience.
Right.
And I can tell you that the line was not always as definitive. And oftentimes when I had had enough, he hadn't, and I didn't have control over that.
Right.
So you try, and we had a great working relationship. But I also can remember having my review one year was on Christmas Eve. Like after dinner on Christmas Eve, not Christmas morning Eve. It went okay. There was always that carrot being dangled of, well, we could work on this or we could do a little bit of that. But so I definitely can appreciate what it's like working with family members, and knowing that sometimes, especially when someone is really excited and passionate about a particular topic, that there can be that, well, I want to keep talking about this, and you might not have had as good of a day, or you may have had a better day, and it's like, okay, can we just shut this down, please?
Yeah.
So I totally get it.
Yeah, no, we've been very fortunate in a sense where we haven't hit that point. Like, I think we're pretty respectful when it's like, I've had a long day, like, I am full at this point, and like, I do love you dearly, but I can't take on any more right now. So maybe we could have this conversation another time, and like that pretty much would just end it. But we make it work. So
yeah.
And that's also something people don't always necessarily understand. Like at work here, like he's Craig, right? At home, he's my husband. So like there's certain things I'll talk to him at home as my husband. And it wouldn't matter if I worked here or anywhere else. It would just be something that I was talking about. So there's lines that are drawn there as well.
Do you find that those lines get blurred though? Sometimes?
No.
No?
Not from my end. I don't know about yours.
No, not really.
We're pretty good at separating.
No.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing it since the beginning of our relationship. It's when we're at work, and when we're not at work, we don't want our relationship to be based off of what we're doing here, whether it's together or separate. So
Sure.
There's just so much more behind the scenes, and having that line is just, it's healthy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's necessary.
The reason I ask is that for me, those lines always got blurred. And I didn't start my relationship with my father, obviously, as a work relationship first, right? Mm-hmm. So, I found that at times when our relationship had become more work dominant, I longed for the days where I was just his son. And now understanding that I'm thinking back to my childhood, or I'm thinking back to my teenage years or my young adult years, where our relationship was very different. And then once we started working together, there was a whole different dynamic that just...
It complicates it.
It totally complicates it. So I'm actually happy to hear that your lines aren't blurred, because I found that mine, when the more blurry they got, the worse things got as far as just our father-son and partner, boss, whatever you want to call it, relationship, that it changed.
Yeah, so I actually also come from a family where my brother and my father work together. So I can completely understand where you're coming from. And they've done a pretty good job at keeping it separate. But the reality is when you come home, like you share about, like if you're excited about work, you talk about where you're working on and projects you're on. And especially when I was fresh out of college, we would talk about work a lot. And so then my brother would talk about work a lot, but it was talking with my dad about work, right? So like for them, it was just natural because that was the environment and they worked together. So they had a lot to talk about and discuss. And then I would be like on the outskirts and be like, oh, I have stuff to talk about work as well. But it also became a thing of, oh, I don't want to talk about work anymore, because that's all we do is talk about work. So I think not even realizing that was going on. And then I guess subconsciously, once Craig and I started dating, that probably definitely factored into saying, you know what, like when we're at home, we're not going to talk about work because home is for home life. And unless there's something that we want to discuss or need to discuss to get it off our chest. But I think that was where it really stemmed from for me.
Yeah.
So, but then I also say, when we are at work, the only time it blurs is when something happens with the kids, because then all of a sudden you go from Laurie, quality manager, to mom or to dad, and it's like, we got to address this right now. So I'd say it blurs more frequently here because we have the kids than it does at home.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it's tough, especially in this time, being a parent and dealing with all the other things that are going on. But I mean, you got two at home and they're being homeschooled at that point, and
Yeah.
things will happen and you need to deal with it on the fly.
Yeah.
It's being a parent is a full-time job on top of two full-time jobs for you guys. Right?
Yes.
I mean, what was it like for you guys during the pandemic, having to you homeschooling and dealing with two young, oftentimes rambunctious kids?
Stressful.
I get
was
it.
hard.
Yeah, it's stressful.
Fortunately, Triangle is very flexible, especially with working parents. And I worked from home from March through July. So I was home full time, trying to deal with the kids' schooling, making sure everything was under control, also dealing with their emotional needs because everything had changed, and also trying to get my work done. And so then I was home through July, and then I started coming back in the office in August. But also, like, there was tons of flexibility because you never know. All of a sudden, we get an email from a teacher saying a test has to get dropped off at school by 3:00. And I was like, how do we do this? So we just made it work. We made it work. It was incredibly stressful. We just tried to spend time together in the evening and wind down as much as we could and put work aside and put the kids aside. But it was incredibly difficult. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I feel incredibly fortunate and sorry for my wife at the same time. I feel fortunate because she is a stay-at-home mom and was able to manage our three kids and the homeschooling dynamic. That being said, the handful of times that I stayed home with the kids because she had something that she had to do, and specifically with my kindergartner, having to hold her hand through virtual learning and Zoom calls and just the attention span, not being able to read, you have to be there with them the entire time.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
It
hard.
was a tough learning curve for them, but for us too. I mean, as I think about it now, I don't think we realized it at the time, but we kind of I'm going to take this portion of the day and you're going to take this portion. Like, so if certain things popped up within hers, I'll cover for something else. And then if something popped up that I'm normally doing, then, she'll cover for me. But, we kind of just divvied up the tasks, it seems like, now that I'm looking back at it. And, it's just, you make sure this is taken care of. I'll make sure this is done. And I mean, it was definitely tough for the kids though, because our daughter would just clam up with the computers, if something stopped working or, she couldn't figure out how to unmute it because the button wasn't working or, didn't realize that the power cord wasn't plugged in and the computer shut off in the middle of it. It was complete breakdown in the beginning.
Yeah,
everything changed so much.
And she's such a perfectionist. So if something
yeah.
went wrong, she would be upset with herself. And we're like, honey, you're not the only person whose computer shut down during class. You're not the only person that didn't get seen when your hand was raised. So the end of last year, just trying to have her grow and be a more understanding of things happen. But going into this school year, they were much better. We actually moved as well. We bought our first house together. Last June we closed, so we moved over the summer. So they started fresh. Actually, both of them in new schools, and they had new bedrooms with setups for like in-home learning. So they were very excited about that. But then they've also like become a lot more responsible. We're very fortunate.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah. So they take care of their stuff. They get it done, their homework, chores, whatever. So, especially with both of us being back in the work office full time, we had the discussion with them. We're like, guys, like we need you to pitch in and we need you to also hold your own weight. And they did. So we've been very lucky with that.